Hey guys, it's Earl and Brian here. Today we're going to go over speedometer function and output to ECU in a couple different chassis. We're going to focus on Nissan and BMW. Those are our two most common swaps. So Nissan, this is going to apply to most chassis like S13, 300ZX, S14, all those kinds of vehicles. So in the factory configuration, we've got our engine here. It's poorly drawn, but it's a good picture here. We've got the transmission, which is going to contain a 2-wire VR sensor. Now, both of those wires terminate directly to the gauge cluster. The gauge cluster then makes the speedometer function, and it outputs a digital signal to the factory Nissan ECU. So that's where the ECU receives its speed signal from, is from the gauge cluster. Now, one of the popular swaps for that chassis is an LS. Now, the LS ECU, it outputs a signal wire. It's a single speed sensor wire. Now, in order for your gauge cluster to work, since initially you had 2 wires coming from the sensor, now you're only having one coming from the ECU, which is the opposite direction you can see here. One of those wires in the cluster is going to have to be grounded in order for your speedometer to work properly. Now, we're going to have a similar situation with a JZ. Now, a JZ, it uses a 3-wire speed sensor, which is a Hall effect. It is provided with 12 volts and a chassis ground, and then it outputs a sensor signal, which is usually a square wave, on 1 wire. So it's going to be the same thing. We're going to have a 1-wire input to the cluster, and we're also going to have a chassis ground to make the speedometer function. Now, one chassis that's a little bit different than Nissan, it's going to be similar to the BMW, is the S15. So S15 is going to get its signal from the differential as well, just like we're going to see with this BMW E36. And it's similar in the E46 as well. So when you're looking at your factory configuration in your BMW, it's again a 2-wire VR sensor. Both wires travel directly to the gauge cluster, and then they output a speed signal to your factory ECU. Now, a lot of people are doing JZ swaps and LS swaps in these cars, and they're going to retain the factory diff, so your speedo is always going to function. But what's nice is if you're doing, say, an aftermarket ECU on your JZ, we're going to add a speed signal that's going to go from your factory cluster to your aftermarket ECU, just like the factory setup. That way you can do things like launch control and rolling anti-lag in your aftermarket ECU. So hopefully just a little bit of overview here on speedometers and how they function in factory form and what we do here to make them function for you when you swap the car. Hopefully that'll give you a little insight and shed some light on how your speedo functions.